Anna Golladay is the Senior Director of Communication and Marketing here at Convergence. Anna has served as Associate Pastor in the United Methodist Church, and her ministry is undergirded by social justice and the inequity that exists both inside and outside the church walls. She's an entrepreneur running a small online-based apparel shop called Bias and Bourbon and social enterprise called Work of Place.
Hi there, my name is Cameron Trimble. I'm the CEO of Convergence, and I am so excited and grateful to be talking today to Anna Golladay, who is a member of our team. So we get to work together day in and day out. But Anna, I felt like your voice was so important on this particular topic because you do a lot of things in the world, and you're very thoughtful and committed to a ministry, I think, that makes a real difference. And so when I thought about the future of spirituality, I thought you really could help us sense and see that future. So tell us all the things that you do, because you do a lot of things in the world.
We should probably time me for maybe an hour, a minute and 15 seconds, just to make sure I don't go on and on. You're right. I do a lot of things in the world. I am, as you said, the Senior Director of Communications and Marketing for Convergence. And what that means is that those of you that are Convergence folks, a large majority of the communications that you receive from us comes from me. In addition to that, I am the curator of design and engagement with the Activist Theology Project. That project was started by my colleague, Robin Henderson Espinosa, about 4 years ago. And our work there has a lot to do with dismantling the culture of supremacy within organizations and helping folks understand where tenets of racism and supremacy culture might show up that they aren't aware. In addition to that, I am a United Methodist pastor. I'm currently unappointed, so I don't serve a local church, but I'm still deeply invested and involved in the work of the UMC, and am diligently working to accelerate the severing of our denomination so that the work that those of us on the side of queer liberation can actually get back to doing the work instead of just talking about doing the work. And then the last thing I do, what I think is the most fun thing I do is I am a apparel designer. I have a snarky Jesus and queer centric t-shirt business. And I sell t-shirts with all the sayings on them that you wish you could say to your parents or your relatives. And now you can just wear those t-shirts around and say it to everybody.
Yes. And I own quite a few. One of my favorites is In My Defense, I Was Left Unsupervised.
Yes.
But you have a number of very fantastic sayings that are printed on these t-shirts. And so Bourbon and Bias, is that
Bias and Bourbon, the other Bias and Bourbon. My two favorite things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which is one of the reasons we get along so well. And go to Etsy to check that out, because it's a wonderful way of being an activist, and just as you're walking down the street and doing life.
Right.
Okay. So you do all of these things, and I love the way you told the story about the UMC, because there's a whole chapter of that. You've
just Google me.
Yep. You've had to walk
it'll all appear.
You've walked this walk, and I think we share this intuition, but when we're thinking about the ways in which change happens, almost always it happens at the margin, and that, in time that change is kind of brought into the mainstream. But what I've observed about you is, and actually, frankly, what you've helped all of us who work with you do is you live at that marginal space. That may be one of your superpowers. You have a lot of superpowers, but and because you exist there, and you're a bridge builder in a sense there, and as much as that you name the injustices, but you do so in a way that still holds the relationship, which I think is a really incredible gift that a lot of us need to cultivate in ourselves, but you seem to do it quite effortlessly. So when we think about the future of spirituality, you're uniquely positioned by choice, I think, and then also by context to provide that marginalized perspective in some ways. I mean, I get we're both white women with white skin, and there's a reality there.
Right.
So when I ask the question, this big, hairy question of what is the future of spirituality from your work in all of these different spaces, what are your instincts? What's the contours, or what are the contours that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think you started to already introduce my thought process in that. And thank you for saying all those kind things. I don't think that I am always doing good work. I think I'm doing the work, but I don't always know it to be good work. I mean, you and I both are conditioned as well-intended white women who are, who were raised in the church under a context of perfectionism. And all of those things contribute to the hairball that is that I try to disentangle on a daily basis and allow myself to really sit both in the margins and with those that are on the margins of the margins, and deeply listen to where their stories arise and how they are finding themselves in today's current world. But I think that, we are, from a spirituality standpoint, we have centered spirituality in many instances in intellectual history and theory and intellectual ethics. And that has created kind of this top-down approach to what spirituality is and or should be for all of us, regardless of faith or lack thereof. And I would actually propose that intellectual and top-down approach to spirituality is what has influenced us primarily up to this point. But if we really want to look at what the future of spirituality is, we need to look at the suppressed truth and the buried truths that are actually bubbling up from the ground, where those on the margins are living, and quite frankly, where our ancestral teachings are actually literally growing from the earth and teaching us hard lessons along the way.
So can I test some? I'm sorry, I just interrupted.
Yeah, no.
But you're doing something important here, I think, and I just want to make sure that I'm hearing this right, because this entire conference, for the most part, it's not 100%, but for the most part, the question of spirituality has always centered the human experience. And what I'm hearing you do is decenter the human experience as you're talking about groundedness. And you're actually saying, if we want to have a conversation about the future of spirituality, we've got to incorporate the whole of creation. Like, okay. Correct. I just wanted to make sure that was the move you were making, because that's a fantastic move.
Correct. I mean, it's not just the whole of creation. Well, it is the whole of creation, but it's the whole of creation and this globe on which we live, because it is really from the roots of the earth and the depths of all of existence that we find the ability to continue to move. Any of us that have studied liberationist theology, that have, placed ourselves in intellectual or just kind of reading conversation with humans like James Cone or Thurman or Gloria Anzaldúa or any of those people, we have to recognize that it is through what is coming from the bottom, and that's both a literal and a figurative word, because from the bottom is both the ground underneath us and also the humans whom we have trampled into the ground underneath us, who quite frankly have the capacity and I think have the story to curate for us a future of spirituality that gives us a much longer runway for possibility than anything that a Eurocentric spirituality gave us from a top-down, heaven-down approach.
Yeah. I like your use of an aviation metaphor there.
I knew you would. I knew you would.
I almost giggled, but I was saying, keep it together, Cameron. Okay, so tell me about, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I suspect many of us listening couldn't agree more. And what do you think this tradition that has been trampled down, or these traditions, it's a multiplicity, what are some of the wisdoms that are obvious to you that give us that longer runway that may not be obvious to the rest of us?
I mean, I think some of them are obvious, and I think some of them may not be. We recognize, and I think this is largely the challenge that many in our, political and academic circles, the challenges that they're facing today is that the more we educate and offer opportunity, sorry.
That's little Ruthie.
That's Ruthie, and that's the UPS man. So she's going to bark for a second, so we'll edit that out. Sorry.
No worries. So everyone should know Anna has a puppy named Ruthie Bader.
Yes.
Well, now that's not her full name. It
is Ruthie Bader, Golladay Creek Mom. Yes.
Yeah.
She's the notorious RBGK.
Right.
So, yes.
Yes. One of our favorite members of our team. So
right.
I appreciate Ruthie's contribution.
Yes. Apologies, friends. The UPS man came to visit us, and she loves, with an asterisk, him. So yeah, as I was saying, I mean, I think the problem that many in power have is that as we expand an awareness and a recognition for those on the underside of humanity, the development of that political and spiritual consciousness that we learn and get from those humans creates a shift in the power dynamic. It creates this seesaw effect that makes predominantly, wealthy white humans really, really nervous. And so I think it is actually through acknowledging the shift in power that we can see a possibility for spirituality that actually allows us to bring in our ancestors and acknowledge the history that we've been taught. It allows us to engage in and welcome the spiritual practices of Black and Brown folk, those spiritual practices that they have curated and have been leaning into for hundreds and hundreds of years, because it has been the way in which they have encountered the divine in the midst of brutal trauma. Those kinds of experiences and those kinds of conversations, if we were to listen to them, if we were to kind of take a page out of what does spirituality look like in the midst of trauma, in the midst of genocide, in the midst of in the heart of racism and slavery, in the midst of an immigration crisis, I mean, all of those things are, those tenets of spirituality are the tenets that I believe need to begin to permeate us. Yeah. One, because our country, for those of us that are listening to this summit from the US, I mean, our country is much more quickly shifting into a, minority majority balance. Also, we have integrated and we have both integrated and segregated our faith structures in such radical ways that the white Eurocentric Christian church is still in radical decline, and yet other entities of spirituality, whether it is the Black church or our friends in the Hispanic community, they're continuing to meet in radical ways, even throughout the pandemic, aren't experiencing the same kind of decline that we are, pandemic or not. There is something in that spiritual connection that they both have to the divine and to the earth, but also that they have to one another. They recognize the spiritual in each other much more than we do. They recognize the divine within each other in ways that I don't think we have ever cared to pay attention to. I mean, those are the kinds of lessons that I think we learn when we allow both those on the underside of history, as well as those whose spirituality has been squashed for so long, to actually be the voices that we begin to listen to.
I'm hearing as a theme or an intuition in you. It seems like this moment in history, because of the ways in which we are globalizing so quickly, that this diversity that you're naming of spiritual experience, but of people groups and of politics and ancestral stories, etc., that all of that's existed throughout all of human history. In fact, throughout all of world history, right? But we've never needed, I mean, we've lived in our little enclaves, our little nation states, our little bubbles, and we've never needed to, we've never been forced and or invited, is maybe a better way of sensing it, to be curious about all of the diversity in the world.
Right.
And then in the face of it, we seem to be responding out of this fear instinct of, you know, if I need to learn about all of these different cultures, then somehow that is scary to me because I'll lose something, or it will threaten my dominant cultural narrative. But it seems that the very survival of all of the diversity of the planet depends on us in entering into that space of curiosity about each other.
I agree. I think that, you know, for many years, and this is less about spirituality and more about the corporateness of the church body. You know, for a very long time, we have cherry picked tenets of culture from those that aren't like us in order for us to feel as if we have integrated them into our own story. I mean, you know, you and I both probably couldn't count on all our fingers and toes the number of times we've seen, you know, advertisements at a church for a, you know, Black spiritual sing-along night, or, you know, the number of times that, you know, a church has decided to offer yoga as an exercise practice for their congregants versus as a spiritual practice for their congregants. I mean, we have, you know, you're right. We have not been forced to, and quite frankly, we never should have been invited into those spaces because of the ways that we've acted and co-opted them in the past. But I think I worry that whiteness makes us think that our job is to seek out those who are not like us and find ways to sink into their spaces or sink into their stories so that we begin to understand them.
Mm.
When it all comes down to it, we can't read or worship or educate our way out of the mess that we've gotten ourselves into. The only response that will categorically allow us to understand and begin to then practice with legitimacy and authenticity the spiritual practices of those who have been on the underside is relationship. We can't there's no speaker that can come into our church and teach us how to do something better that isn't ours to own in the first place. And I think that the thing that we've lost through both the pandemic in the church and simply through our belief of our own spirituality as being better, superior to others, is that the individualness or the small, intimate nature of spirituality within the walls of one community has been the thing that has allowed us to say how deeply ingrained in our faith we are. It really is, from my vantage point, in the streets and around the dinner table and within the expansiveness of protest movements and through, sitting alongside individuals at city council meetings, fighting for, housing equity that allows them to not have their neighborhoods gentrified out from under them, that help us understand and allow us to build the kind of relationships with those humans that would then let us experience the kind of spirituality that I really do believe is the future. And my fear is that many of us, and when I use those words, we and us, I mean us white folks, don't have either the desire or the time or the humbleness to put ourselves in those places and to allow ourselves to be the followers in those spaces and the learners in those spaces in order for us to embrace what I think is the future of spirituality. And I mean, that's kind of a Debbie Downer moment for this conversation. And yet I really do think that it is from the margins that we will learn how to process through and deal with the trauma of what the pandemic has created for us. It will be through our understanding and our recognition that generations before us and all of these ancestors before us have found ways to, for lack of a better metaphor, climb from the ashes of destruction, family destruction, and community destruction and emotional destruction, to still maintain the kind of divineness within them that I think is the future of the world. And I don't know what that says about me, but
well, hopefully you've got a really great therapist.
Right. Yes.
No, I think you're onto something so true and right and beautiful. To zero in on relationships is such a powerful space to take us, because genuine relationship is reciprocal. There is giving and receiving, and it's a giving and a receiving in the best of our relationships that that's grounded in a compassion and empathy. For one another. There's a mutual holding of one another's well-being, that gets centered in that. I mean, that's what I've watched you do, even as you're, railing in the protests and standing up, there is still presence in you. It's almost energetic. There's an empathy. There is a, you don't just go all like raging crazy. There's a deep concern about what we're mutually up to together, even if we're in disagreement. I want to know about that skill. Is that something you were born into the world with, or did you learn this? Is this a thing that we all need to be trained in as we navigate these relationships?
I was not born into that. No. Yes, I would love for us all to find a way to be trained into it, because I do believe that that kind of empathy really relates to my understanding, after many, many years of being told otherwise, that the best option for me was to really shut up and listen and follow. And as a Enneagram 7 wing 8 radical extrovert, someone who prides myself on my leadership and strategic, planning capacity and capabilities, is one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do, ever had to learn. I am really lucky and highly, highly blessed that I have had in my friendship circles, not just in my acquaintances, but in my deep, intimate friendship circles, humans of color who have not only allowed me to screw up and take another, and then have gifted me another chance at engage and at figuring out how to engage in situations like that when they come again. But also humans who have found ways to say very hard things to me, things that I have taken into therapy more times than not, things that I have read in text messages that have come from people I love that have struck me mute, and like with that like anxious hiccup in my chest of, oh my God, I cannot believe that I did that, and that I've just been called out on it. That kind of kinship, that kind of relationship that I have with those humans has made every ounce of difference in the world for me. And it really has only, I think, begun to feel realized in the way that I move and breathe in the world over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, I've been working on myself in that work for probably 10 years. But it really has only started to be realized, to be, engaged in, what I am in this space as an activist, most recently. All of my Slack announcements are coming in all of a sudden. And so I think so yes, I would love for all of us to have the kind of relationships that I have had that have gifted me the awareness and the clarity. I also think that there are ways that we as humans in the world can engage in anti-racist training, can, learn from Black and brown and queer people in spaces of leadership that will help us understand the do's and don'ts in the work. But again, I could read every anti-racist book in that's been published in the last 10 years. And some days I feel like I have. Yeah. But none of those books and none of that reading, and quite frankly, none of the anti-racist trainings that I've been in come close to giving me the kind of perspective and the kind of empathetic reaction that I feel like I hold because of the kinships that I've had with people who have been willing to tell me hard truths.
Yes. Yeah. So it's the fullness of the experience. It's the, let's do the learning that's incumbent upon all of us who are privileged to do, but we can't continue to live in our bubbles and think that a head trip is sufficient for that kind of the transformation that's really needed.
And we also can't rely on the labor of Black and brown people to always tell us how to be better humans.
Right.
And so when we're thinking about how we engage in or are curious about spirituality in the context of what we're talking about during this summit, we will all need to start with the learning piece. And we will then need to enter into the relationality piece. But that relationality piece is not just two-way, but it also has to involve a human on one end that is willing to say hard things and also allow themselves to be hurt by folks like you and I when we screw it up. And then on the other side, a human who is willing to do their best and listen really carefully about what they're being told, but also put their feelings aside when they're told what they actually did and how they should do better. And it is often difficult to encourage or to even ask of Black and brown folk that kind of labor, because they have been doing that labor their entire lives, whether we have paid attention to it or not.
Yes. Hear, hear. If there, as you think about the future of spirituality, is there a word or a phrase that comes to mind that we could use as a beacon or a guidepost to kind of hold on to a vision as we're moving together into this future? Yeah,
I mean, I think my word would always be liberative. I mean, the context and concept of liberation really asks us to not just remove the chains of those who have been bound, but to destroy the chains altogether. And liberation requires us to take a radical look at every system that we are a part of, whether that system is capitalism or our HOA or our church or the organization or Fortune 500 company we work for, and really seek to figure out how equity is the bare minimum. Liberation is actually also going to ask of us to figure out what a reparative model might look like. And as we're thinking about spiritual contexts, especially as it relates to our faith communities, whether it's our church or our synagogue or our mosque or our yoga community, any of those things, being people who really do understand and seek liberation in every single facet that it could and might exist, and also agree that our baseline, like we will never go any lower than equity, and below equity is equality. So equality is even too low. Equity is our bare minimum. I mean, those two words speak to a spirituality of possibility for me, a spirituality of hope, a spirituality that honors everything that's come before us, but also kind of creates in us the imagination and the possibility for what can be. But if it were me, my word would be liberation or liberative. Yeah.
I think you're awesome.
Thanks.
I'm just so blown away by you. And I'm just so grateful that our paths have crossed and that you do what you do. And I thank you for this conversation.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I hope everyone is enjoying Courageous Faith. And I hope that we continue to be able to do this work and ask these hard questions of other people that we believe to have good answers, so that all of us can find that liberation in some way.
Hear, hear.